Anyway, that was a great panel. Fantastic. The next one is a bit of a surprise. None other than Max Keiser. How are we doing? Are you looking ready? You mic'd up? You looking forward to it? Okay.
Those guys
Can we give a very warm welcome onto the stage to Max Keiser? And I'm going to go and enjoy this tequila. Come on, Max. It's your time to shine.
Fabulous. Thank you, Joe. How's everybody doing? Woo! All right, let's get the clock to 15 minutes. Got it. These two guys are coming up right after me. They're hot to trot. They've got a very exciting presentation coming very shortly. So my name is Max Keiser, and I live here in El Salvador now. I moved here. I'm living the Bitcoin dream. And I think it's important and interesting to look at some of the details and what this all means and what this entails and how does one become a Bitcoiner in a Bitcoin dreamland of El Salvador. Well, we just came back from Lugano, Switzerland. And exciting things are happening there. Lugano is now a sister city to El Salvador. There has been named an honorary council, or basically a diplomat. This is the first Bitcoin diplomat to represent Bitcoin on behalf of El Salvador in Switzerland. Josue Lopez is his name. Where's Josue? Put your hand up. There he is. The first Bitcoin diplomat in the world. That's how we spread the message. Now, President Bukele has said he wants to take this message all over the world, opening up consulates, El Salvador Bitcoin model. We're looking at Austin, Texas. We're looking at different cities around the world to spread the word, to spread the what I would call the Salvadoran model or the El Salvador model of hyper-Bitcoinization and what it means to a country when they make Bitcoin legal tender and they start mining Bitcoin using the stranded energy in the volcanoes. So you notice today, one of the volcanoes is smoking. It's on fire. It's happening. That's raw Mother Earth energy ready to be harnessed to mine the hardest money ever known to humanity for this country. You just got to tap into it. So about a year ago when I talked to Bukele about this, I said, you know, Bukele, you need to create a volcano bond. That's right. And happy to report to you today that the volcano bonds, the securities laws that go with those volcano bonds, it's basically imminent, and the actual bond itself is ready to go. And this will be the first time we've seen financialization meet Bitcoin in the form of a volcano bond. So investors are getting essentially a bond that's backed by the ability to mine Bitcoin using volcanoes. Hopefully, and absolutely, this means that this country can say goodbye to their sources of funding in the past, like the IMF. Right? So the IMF, as we all know, is part of the central banking cartel, which has had free reign all over the world in imposing a US dollar standard and imposing conditionality for their loans. Anyone who's read Confessions of an Economic Hitman knows the deal. The IMF comes in, other organizations come in, and they load you up with debt, and if you can't pay the debt and extract all your resources and keep you as a third world nation, then they send in the economic hitmen, and your presidents start flying out of airplanes. You have certain accidents happen. There's an overthrow. I think 15 coups and overthrows have happened in this region over the past few years. Thanks to good old Uncle Sam, the CIA, the IMF. Why? Because they're greedy fucks, and they figured, you know what? We can just go down to Central America, steal everything we fucking want to steal, and if they don't like it, we're just going to kill motherfuckers. And that's America's foreign policy. Yeah. Yeah. if we don't like you, we just fucking kill you. Yeah! Yeah, that's diplomacy, baby. Yeah, that's America. But the Salvadoran model is a departure from that. So what happens when you have a president making Bitcoin legal tender and you end up with the Salvadoran dream and the El Salvador model? It's not the Washington consensus, which is a model that's been in place for many years. This is actually the guiding principles that are in place for the colonialization of Central America and Latin America. We've just described it. They have a fancy name for it. They call it the Washington Consensus. It's not neoliberalism, which, of course, we all know what neoliberalism is all about in terms of a certain form of hypercapitalism, send in the bankers, privatize things, sell things back and forth to your buddies on Wall Street, ad infinitum, make a lot of fees. There's no economic justification for it. It adds nothing to the economy. It's a purely self-serving rentier model where a lot of insiders get rich, but bankrupts all the companies and countries that go down that path. It's not the project for the new American century. This is another Washington program cooked up not too long ago where the United States identified all the countries that it needs to invade and exploit over the coming years in an attempt to secure oil and keep it out of the hands of the Chinese. So if you want to look into that a little bit more, you can find out about America's exploit in Iraq and how that was all designed years before to try to at least keep the oil from the Chinese, which is the existential enemy at the moment. It's very interesting and key that with Bitcoin you have an attribute that is unique. It's the first time in history. It's one of them. I would say it's the defining characteristic of Bitcoin, and that is that you separate money from state. So never before in history has this been possible. All forms of money, even gold, suffers from interference by the state, centralization by the state. Certainly this is true of fiat money. But with Bitcoin, you have pure decentralization. It's unconfiscatable. It's uncensorable. And the state is really outside of controlling this money. And once you take the state out of the equation, you have a whole new model for governance of an economy, a governance of a country, governance of the money. And the results are plain to see here in El Salvador. People are very hopeful. People are very proud of the revolution that's taking place here. The entrepreneurial spirits are being unleashed as part of the Bitcoin revolution and making Bitcoin legal tender. There is an intolerance of violence because Bitcoin is also an interesting technology in that it monetizes love and peace and it demonetizes hate and violence. And how does it do that? Well, because it's unconfiscatable, I cannot coerce you or to commit violent acts against you to get your stuff. I have to go to you with an exchange of like-for-like value in exchange for Bitcoin. And we have to have an amenable conversation about it. So it takes violence out of the equation. It takes hatred out of the equation in commerce, which is remarkable. And we see what's happened here is that once Bitcoin was made legal tender, and once the magic of the protocol was inculcated in the mindset and the behavior of everybody in this country, including the political class, and they become fiercely intolerant of violence, they went to war against the gangs. The gang war against the gang is a direct result of Bitcoin adoption, in my opinion, because Bitcoiners are intolerant of violence. And if you look at where this violence came from, this is something that Alex Gladstein never talks about over at the Human Rights Organization. The violence and the gangs in this country were exported to this country from Los Angeles, from the prison system, where the M13 gang members were groomed, manufactured, and turned into terrorists, and then Bill Clinton sent them back here to continue the colonialization and exploitation of this country on behalf of the IMF and the United States and all those other fuckers up north. That's the fact. So what the president here is saying, you know what? We're going to take this Bitcoin thing to the logical extension, and we're going to be totally intolerant of the violence, and we're going to protect the human rights of the 7 million people who live here. The 7 million people live here have human rights. I mean, I saw on Twitter just an hour ago, so-called human rights activist Alex Gladstein saying, is anyone here talking about the violence here in San Salvador? Yeah, I'm talking about it, Alex, and you're a fucking spy. You're working for the CIA. You're a fucking spook. You have no credibility whatsoever. You are pro-terrorist. Come on down here. I've invited him innumerable times, but he's too chicken shit because all of his assumptions will be destroyed. All of his programming from his little handlers will be erased. He won't show up because he's a fucking pussy. If he wasn't, he'd be down here right now. He challenge his assumptions, but we're not going to see him. With Bitcoin, all citizens become self-sovereign. When they take control, this is the exact opposite of a dictatorship. A dictatorship, by definition, is centralized with centralized control. If you're giving people self-sovereignty and they have their own private keys and there's unconfiscatable wealth, that's the opposite. You're freeing your people. You're freeing the people. If you think this is a dictatorship, you don't know the definition of dictatorship, or you're a fucking spook spreading lies for your handlers at the IMF. Alex. When you take the state out of money, you end up with a society that's more egalitarian, altruistic. It's a new social contract. You know, in the United States is the product of the age of enlightenment, the age of human rights, the idea of an enlightened social contract between the governed and the governance, and those being governed, and the idea that there's a quid pro quo and that there's somehow going to be an ability to live in concentrated populations in a way that's mutually beneficial for all, and we came up with something called the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and government by and for the people, and that's been really effective for a while, but in the last 50, 60 years, it's been co-opted by the centralizing cartel of bankers who have played the system and gamed the system and printed lots of fiat money. I'm not talking about Sam Bankman-Fried. I'm talking about Alan Greenspan, Hank Paulson, Ben Bernanke, Jay Paulson. They're no different than Bankman-Fried. They're no different. They're the same, cut from the same cloth. They just print money, and they buy political influence so that it's easier for them to print more money to concentrate power because they're dictators, because they are trying to drive us back to feudal times, neo-feudal times. All wealth is concentrated in the top 1/10 of 1%, and everyone else is a serf. Bitcoin puts, it fucks it up. Puts a spanner in the works, to be more eloquent. It puts a spanner in the works, and it destroys their plans, doesn't it? Because now it's unconfiscatable, and people are working in a way where they're not trying to just make more power so that they can survive by being more corrupt. They're working because they want to add something to society. You know, I'm so old, I remember back in the 1960s where people did shit just because they loved to do it, not because they were crooks. And we just have lost that as a society. Everyone in this society is trying to be a bigger crook than their neighbor, than their president, than their associates. It's all crooked. It's crooked from the top all the way down. And Bitcoin, it puts a spanner in the works because a lot of people, believe it or not, if they're good at doing something like making poetry or baking cookies or taking care of kids or being a nurse or a firefighter or something like that, they're happy doing it because they like doing it. They're not greedy fucks. We've destroyed everybody with this money printing and easy money and 0% interest rates. And the Bitcoin restores price discovery. It restores the idea of value, not only of your money, but values as a society. And that goes throughout the entire community. and it has a multiplying effect. You know, you see it here. We get rid of the gang members, and you got 5,000 pupusa sellers. They just got a 20% tax hike because they got rid of the gangs that were extorting $6 billion a year from everybody in this country. That's a $6 billion gift back into the community, and now they're hiring other pupusa sellers to work for them, and they're hiring more pupusa sellers, and it's becoming an entrepreneurial virtuous cycle, which is what you want. You want to turn proof of work, right? And anyway, with one other thing I'll mention is that people like Alex Gladstein at the Human Rights Organization will say that Bitcoin is a Trojan horse that is working its magic here despite the intentions of leadership. That's fucking horse shit. Bukele was into Bitcoin in 2017. He's fully aware of the transformative power. He's fully aware he's distributing power to the community. And you've been here a couple of days, you've had the experience. I think you begin to understand what I'm saying. With that, I thank you very much. I turn it over to the next speaker, and have a good day. All right.
Numero tres. Wow.